What is a brand to you?
Oh, did we start recording?
Yeah. Let me
Oh.
ask. Yeah, sorry. Hey, I thought this is what you do for a living. No, I'm kidding. So if you go to Oxford, your life is likely just set in stone, and it's going to be perfect. Well, that's not exactly what happened to Jeremy Ryan Slate, who did go to Oxford and became a teacher. Then only to realize that it just wasn't for him. He was stuck. He didn't know what to do. Did MLM, a bunch of other stuff, a lot of things that failed. But ultimately, in the end, he started a podcast. That podcast got picked up. And now Jeremy Ryan Slate is one of the most popular and influential people in the world with Command Your Brand. In this episode of the 1004 show, we dig deep with Jeremy Ryan Slate. I even stump him a couple of times. As you know, the self-proclaimed best interviewer in the world. That's me, Zach Miller. We deep dive into a lot of things with Jeremy. We talk about financing, coming up from a really small town, a lot of things that people don't know about him, and really just to figure out how to position yourself to get the results that you want. Jeremy Ryan Slate, the Ryan's intentional in there, and we get into that as well. This episode is for you if you are trying to figure out how to position yourself to get the results that you want. It's Jeremy Ryan Slate. The 1004 show starts in 3, 2. Roll that thing that we roll. So what is a brand to you?
Well, I think that the interesting thing about it, and most people don't get this, is a brand is your public persona, first of all, but it's also something people can connect with. And I think that's the biggest thing. Like, I just finished reading Shoe Dog by Phil Knight about Nike, and that's the biggest thing that people don't – oh, you got it behind you? Oh, it's amazing, dude. I just finished it, and I think to me it made me appreciate the brand of Nike so much more to know Phil's personal story and what he was through. And I think that's the biggest thing in branding right now, because it's tough to be a big brand anymore, but branding is really connecting with people and having something they can connect with.
I'm only 81 pages in. My favorite part so far is just his tenacity.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting is, and maybe I misread this, but he wasn't in the military, but he needed to go from basically Portland to LA, and he gets like a military jacket and decides to kind of sneak on a plane, which is pretty ridiculous.
He was in the National Guard, actually. So
okay,
he was like one of those guys that like once a month goes and does stuff on the weekends.
Got it. Okay. But still, I mean, he used that opportunity to go and travel, and then, people that complain about, not getting opportunities, and he's waiting for literally mail to come in.
You got to create opportunities, man. I think that's the biggest thing you can learn from that book. It's like the amount of opportunities he created, and it took him till like 73, I think, to be successful. It's incredible.
And to think that this book, it seems like, has nothing to do with the Michael Jordan era or anything like that, and
nothing.
I mean, that's incredible. And so what, you went to Oxford, you then decided to start a podcast. What kind of led you to kind of the life that you've been living?
It's a little bit of a loaded question, man.
It is.
Because it's funny because like being here isn't where I expected to be at all. Like I expected to be teaching at a university with a tenured professor position, but it just didn't work out that way. At 19, I had what should have been an easy knee surgery, but they screwed it up. I spent 3 days in ICU, and I got last rites. And the crazy thing is, man, my life didn't change. It wasn't until almost losing a parent at 24 that I was kind of like, wow, what am I doing here? And I had been doing this whole get your master's, do all this stuff. And I didn't get the PhD, which was crazy. So I couldn't teach college level. I ended up teaching in a high school. So I'm absolutely miserable teaching in high school. And I didn't make a change when, almost lost my own life and received last rites. But when I almost lost a parent, it kind of made me look at it like, wow, this whole life thing is super fragile. And it was after that I started looking for other means of doing things.
Why were you miserable during that time?
It wasn't what I thought it was going to be. You know what I mean? I don't know that my heart was totally in it because I didn't know what my purpose was. I really wanted to teach people. And if I look at everything I'm doing now, I'm teaching in many, many different ways. Just the classroom setting was not for me. And I feel like I sound like the old guy, man. I'm going to be 31 in May, but I feel like I sound like the old guy that at 25, I'm like kind of freaked out in a classroom that kids are trying to piss you off so they can get you on YouTube and all this kind of stuff. And it's just like, it wasn't fun, man. Like I feel like saying, school wasn't like that when I was in school, because we barely had cell phones. So it's really, really interesting to kind of go through that. And just every day was just not fun. I love learning, and I couldn't seem to ignite that in other people. But in everything I do now, I have. And I think that's really interesting. It's maybe things don't always have to look like you want them to look or you think they should look.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. As I'm taking notes, I said, I'm writing down, like, the medium that you chose was the wrong medium, but the activity that you wanted to do is still the same activity. So knowing that some sort of apprenticeship or internship could have maybe led you down this path earlier, how could you have changed that? Or how could someone else that is saying, I want to be a teacher, and I need to, teach to high schools or middle schools or whatever it is, but understand that maybe the medium in the classroom isn't that as important as making sure that activity is there?
Well, I'm a huge proponent of apprenticeships now, but I think the interesting thing about that is I come from a very blue collar family. My mom was a high school graduate, didn't go to college. My dad got kicked out of high school and didn't finish. So the idea of like owning your own business or doing anything like that just wasn't real for me. It wasn't until I met my wife, who's had a family business for years and years and years, that I kind of had this idea that, oh, wow, you can do something other than work for somebody. So I think I really can't change that because it's just the background I came from. But I'm a huge proponent of apprenticeships now, because I think who knows at 17, 18 years old what they want to do the rest of their life? Nobody. And I think that's the biggest thing too, is not everybody needs to go to college, man. Like I didn't need to go. Like for everything I'm doing now, I'm self-taught. Yeah, it's cool to say, I went to Oxford and I have a master's degree and I have all this stuff, but what do I do but pay for it every month? And I think that's the interesting thing people have to understand is, not everybody has to go to college, man. Not everybody has to do things the way the traditional route, as you like to say. There's a different way sometimes. And for me, unless I had met my wife who had been in business, her whole life, growing up in a family that owned a business, I wouldn't have looked at anything.
I think that is so important. So I've given a couple talks now to high schoolers, and they're like, what should I do? I was like, call up the business that you think you want to work at and try and work there for a week and see if you like it. So I remember I have a journalism degree. I went to West Virginia University, 5 years of college, too much money. And my first week, I learned more than I did the entire time in school, at least from a journalism perspective. And then about a year into it, I realized the honeymoon was over and I realized that I hated it. And had I gone through that earlier, maybe through some internship or apprenticeship, or actually just talking to someone saying, hey, this world is kind of gnarly and not fun. Like you're meeting someone on the worst day of their life every day. Like I probably would have gone down a different path, but I did what everyone told me to do instead of a series of different tests. And so I think that's really important. So you have a podcast that is pretty popular. It's called Create Your Own Life.
Yeah.
So you think you've created your own life?
Absolutely, man. Because I'm a guy that didn't really have any business being where I am. You know what I mean? Like I was an academic. I've written lots of papers. I've had, academic books and stuff like that published. But who the heck thought I would have been in media? And let me tell you, that was the weirdest thing, by the way. You probably know this as a journalist. That was the weirdest thing, by the way, to go from academic writing to like writing that people can consume and be educated in a different way. That was really hard. So I think that's the thing that's interesting is I didn't expect to be here at all. I had to learn skills I went through many different jobs. I had to learn skills in each and every job that I was in. I learned cold calling from life insurance. I learned recruiting from being in network marketing. I learned how to do different projects and things like that from being a CMO at a company. So I think that's the thing that I've had to do through everything I've done, man. I've had to learn skills along the way because everything I thought I needed was something I didn't use.
How do you learn?
It's funny because I feel like I'm a lot different than a lot of people. I don't do well in an environment with somebody else trying to teach me. I love self-education. Everything I've ever learned is from a book or a YouTube channel or whatever. I've taught myself HTML, CSS, ClickFunnels, web design, all this different stuff through learning how to do it myself. I'm somebody that just likes to hands-on do things. And it's funny because I had good grades in school, but I'm not well suited to a classroom setting. I'm somebody that likes to just consume things myself and just kind of deal with you later.
Interesting. So knowing that and knowing that the world of school is changing, where do you think we'll be in 10 years? Do you think we'll, at least from a higher education standpoint, college and so forth, do you think that we'll continue to have, the majority of people going to school, or do you think we're going to start seeing businesses, fade back a little bit? Where do you think kind of the university goes?
Well, I think that's a model that's got to change at some point, man. There is more student loan debt than credit card debt in this country, and it's kind of crazy because did you know that? No?
No, really?
Yeah, there's more student loan debt than credit card debt in this country because it's really easy at 17, 18 years old to get a loan without even a cosign or anything like that.
Sure.
So I think that's something really interesting to look at because it's so easy to get that credit. Those prices keep ballooning. And I think the system isn't about the end result of what you're going to achieve anymore. It's just about the process and being there. And I think that's something that has to change. Like, it has to be about the end result. And I think the idea of apprenticeships and mentorship is actually going to be something that's going to work its way back into our education system. I know there's a guy that I follow a lot, Dennis Yu, that has a company called Blitz Metrics, and they actually have built a mentorship program into their business. And I think that's a lot more of what you're going to start seeing because, like you had mentioned, work at a job you want to work at for a week. And I think that's the big difference is I just don't know if this current system is built up for people to succeed. And that's from somebody that's, been higher educated up to wazoo. I've got this degree and that degree and whatever. And I don't see a purpose in it. I really don't.
Yeah. I still have one student loan. It was for $14,000 12 years ago. I literally just looked at this yesterday. It's almost doubled, and I've paid the minimum every month. Like, how is that possible? Like, I'm sitting there like, I think I'm almost done. And then actually somehow from the 14, it's now like, okay, maybe not double. It's like $25,000 is what I owe, and I paid the minimum every time. I'm like, how is that possible? Like,
well, here's the thing, and that's another thing, man. Like, people don't. There's so much about the education system that people don't get. You struck a chord with me, by the way. There's so much about the education system that people don't get. Like, do you have a car loan by any chance? Like, have you bought a car and paid a car payment?
I don't have one now.
Okay, cool. So those are simple interest payments, meaning if you pay more money, it pays off faster. Student loans aren't built that way. They actually compound interest on a daily basis. So let's say you're paying 5% interest, right? Day one of the month, you're paying 5% interest in that total balance. Day two of the month, you're now adding that 5% to the balance, multiplying it by 5%. And you just do that every single day. So the balance grows every day and the percentage grows every day. So it's basically a compounded daily type of interest, and you're screwed. That's really what it's all about. So unless you know how you pay off your student loans, man? You open a bank account, put whatever the amount of money in it you need it is, and pay it off in full. Because if you're paying monthly payments, it's not going to go anywhere. I'll tell you, I've paid more interest than I paid on principal on this stuff. So I totally get it.
Mm. So why is this money thing so important to you? Why does it tick you off?
The reason it annoys me is because let's look at it this way, right? Like, you're a kid getting out of college. You don't really know what you want to do yet. You want to create things, but now you're in indentured servitude the rest of your life. So that's what I think there's a lack of education before people make those decisions. And it goes right back to what you said. Work in what you want to do to decide if you actually want to do it. Because you could have, decide you want to be a marine biologist or something like that, and all of a sudden you're in sales. So that's what we really need to take a look at. If what we're doing in terms of our education lines up with where we want to go. And if it doesn't, it may not be the best investment of $50, $80, $100,000. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I did a blog post, kind of a long form blog post maybe 3 years ago, and a couple of my friends had MBAs, and they kept complaining about it. And I'm like, why are you complaining about it? And they're like, well, I started a business and I have an MBA, and yet I'm not necessarily anywhere closer because I still have to figure out what works. And then I started looking. It was like $140K a year is what the average MBA costs. And I was like, wow, imagine if you took that $200K plus and invested in that in building relationships with people by just taking everyone you know and everyone you want to reach out to coffee or lunch or even some crazy experience for up to $1,000. You could learn a lot and build that network. And so at the end of the day, I think college, universities is about alumni, the network that you have there. You can build that on your own, though, and then sports. Right. Yeah. And so until those things go away, I mean, who knows what's going to happen? But I agree with you. I think, apprenticeships, mentorships, all that type of stuff is important. And I think we're going to see better opportunities for, our youth if we do change those things.
And I'm not knocking education because education is not a bad thing. We really need to have it to be able to do things in our life. I just think the current system and the way it's done isn't set up for people to succeed.
Yeah, I agree. And I think education, I don't think we're saying we don't want to learn. We're saying that the way that we're learning is the problem. And, I was a 2.0 student at best, yet I can self-teach myself everything. And I do, just like you. So, you've interviewed over 300 people for your podcast. Who's your favorite guest of all time?
Grant Cardone, just because I followed the guy for so long. It was so cool to finally just be able to interview him, and just it's really cool when somebody you admire is actually a super cool person. You know what I mean? I had followed up with the guy in email every month for 7 months, and actually ran into him in New York City, and I was like, wow, that's Grant Cardone. So I actually ended up talking to him, and he's like super, super nice in person. Like, I was trying to get through his people, and it just never worked out. And he's like, oh, what do you do, man? I'm like, I have a podcast. He's like, cool, let's do an interview. I'm like, really? I've been trying to do that for like, ever. So to me, that was really cool because it was somebody I admired, but also gave me a lot of credibility because then I was able to actually use that to score a lot more interviews. And I think that's the biggest thing people don't realize in getting interviews is a lot of times it's a social proof in who you've interviewed allows you to kind of climb the ladder to get more interviews, if that makes sense.
100%. I just learned about Grant Cardone maybe 1 month ago. It was a video of him basically walking in on his team in the Cube farm, and the guy couldn't make the sale, and he basically gets on the phone and makes the sale. And I was like, whoa, this is ridiculous. This is really cool. And so I actually just reached out to him to be on this show. I'm talking to his people now, so I guess I'm going to have to wait 7 months at least or go to New York and find him.
Hey, if you got bigger numbers than I had, man, you may get it. I don't know. At the time, I didn't have very big numbers.
What do you think your numbers were at that point?
I was doing anywhere between 10 and 20,000 downloads a month, and they wanted to see more than that. And I think once I got like I said, meeting him on the street and getting the interview helped me to get more numbers.
Yeah.
If I had just waited on that organic reach, I don't know if it would have happened. Like, that was actually a big booming off point, was to have him on the show.
Well, and then you get higher numbers too because of it, right?
Exactly. So that did help the future.
I think you just used 2 words that I really like. I guess 3. Credibility helps in the social proof. And so I don't think people leverage what they've done in the past to get them forward enough. And so, whether or not you were featured in a specific publication, you had someone that you interviewed that was a bigger name than you, or a big event happened in your life, we're not telling those stories enough. And so what are the 3 or 4 kind of big events or big mediums or big people that you've been able to leverage to, get bigger and higher in the world?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's actually a really great book called Positioning, The Battle for Your Mind. And I think it was by Al Rees or something like that. And I think that's the biggest thing that people actually forget about is this idea of positioning, right? Like, they all want to talk about branding and everything else, but they forget about the sub thing of positioning. When you're seen against an influencer, when you're seen against a publication, when you're seen against a lot of these different things, your credibility rises. So for me, the huge thing was the first time I got featured in Inc. That was a huge deal because that actually, my parents were not super supportive when I went into my own business. When I got that Inc. feature, they came right over to my side and were one of my biggest promoters. So that was huge. Interviewing Grant Cardone was huge because it helped my brand grow, and a lot of the crazy 10Xers started listening to me. And they are faithful as anybody in terms of their listenership. So my audience grew substantially from doing that. There was last January, I got featured as one of the top 26 podcasts to listen to by CIO Magazine. I was ranked number 14, and that just was recently re-released for 2018. They do it once a year, and I was number 2 this year. So that's really helped my credibility being featured there as well.
Moving on up in the world.
Yeah, man, 14 and number 2. That's a pretty good year.
It's so, positioning is so important. And I tell people, all my clients, I'm actually writing a book called Anomaly, How to Finally Stand in the Crowd. And a lot of it is about positioning, saying, hey, you have done this thing, but you're not positioning yourself. You're not even telling the world what happened. And so mine are a feature in Entrepreneur. I was invited to the White House. I've raised money from the guys who created the Weather Channel. Hustled my way onto a TV show, like to host a TV show. I interviewed Damon John, like all these. So those are things that people know, yeah. And so you say them because they're like, oh, this person is credible. This person does know what he's talking about. Look what he's already done, and that helps you grow as well. And so I really like that.
Well, and I think if people want to follow somebody that's really great at that, Brian Smith, who's the founder of UGG Boots, he made the company successful enough, but he sold it when it wasn't really worth that much money. And now it's $1 billion company. Like I want to say he sold it when it was around like 20 million or something like that. You have to quote me on the number. Like it wasn't huge. Like it was successful, but it wasn't huge. So now he uses UGG founder Brian Smith in everything he does. And because of that, credibility, because everybody's heard of UGG. So of course, people that haven't heard of Brian are like, oh, he's instantly credible. He started UGG. And I think that's the type of people need to be observing.
Even someone like Noah Kagan, who 30 at Facebook, 4 at Mint. I don't know why I'm knowing these numbers, but those are the things that he would push, right? And now he probably doesn't have to push that as much, but he still does because those are credible things that people have heard of. And it's so interesting because I think people think that they're being cocky by saying it. But I say
positioning is a lost art form, man. It really is.
Yeah, it's so true. Talking with Jeremy Ryan Slate. Why do you put your middle name in that when you talk?
Google Jeremy Slate, and you'll see I've started to creep onto the first page, but you'll see there's actually a guy that used to be on the TV show Bonanza, also from New Jersey, named Jeremy Slate, who my parents named me after, believe it or not, because they thought it was funny. So I used Jeremy Ryan Slate so that I could build up authority in Google, and now that actually helped me to rank on the first page for my own name.
So I did Google that last night, and I learned about that. So my name is Zach Miller. I compete with 2 professional football player tight ends.
Yeah, man. How you doing? How you doing on the Raiders? It looks like you had a good year last year.
Well, if I was on the Bears, I almost broke my leg. Or I did break my leg. So that's always interesting. During football games, this is actually pretty funny. The Zach Miller from the Bears, I think his Twitter is Zach Miller 86. Mine is Zach Miller 84. So I'll get tweets during the game going, "Hey, great touchdown," and I respond back just like, "Thanks, man, appreciate it." It's just, I don't know, it's funny. But yeah, I agree with you. It's hard to compete against celebrities, if you will, or people that have NFL.com coming or ESPN.com behind them. So
and the guy the guy I have the same name as has been around since like the 60s, man. So it's like, he died, thankfully, in 2006, and they stopped paying the hosting last year on jeremyslate.com, so I finally bought it. But I think that's the thing people don't realize, man. Like, you actually have some of these, like, I guess, first world problems if you actually have to be found in Google.
Yeah, huge. What's something about you most people don't know about?
It's funny because I feel like people that know me well know that I'm a fitness addict, but most people in the public eye don't. I'm a former competitive powerlifter, which I actually, in terms of positioning, don't promote well enough. I won a lot of contests and stuff like that. So I don't. People that meet me in person the first time are like, "Wow, dude, you're buff." But when they know me online and through a lot of the media I do, most people don't realize that I'm as into fitness as I am.
Well, you are, clothed up at this point. You don't really look swole at the same way. If and that might be one of the reasons why. But then when they see you in person, that's probably why. So why are podcasts now becoming kind of mainstream when radio, if you will, has been popular forever?
Well, let's look at one thing here, right? You have a smartphone, so you have huge access to downloadable media, and I think that's huge. And believe it or not, your cell phone actually has ability to do like very clear radio transmission, but your cell phone provider is actually blocking it. So it makes radio harder and harder to listen to, and you could get perfect quality that way, unlike you could get on a radio. So because of that, downloadable digital media makes more sense. And the thing you have to think about is people have to make 3 decisions when they do that. They have to make the decision to have the smartphone app. If you're on an iPhone, it already comes on it. They have to make the decision to download that. Then they have to make the decision to listen to it. And I think that's the biggest thing people have to consider. People are super engaged by that point. I had to make 3 decisions to listen to you, whereas they charge you for advertising like the radio. I know here in the New York area, like ABC Radio charges you an arm and a leg for a Saturday afternoon show that only people's grandparents listen to. And I think that's the biggest difference is the engagement and the quality of the audience, because you may have a quote unquote big audience in TV or radio, but they're not going to be engaged to the point. Like, people listen to radio because they have nothing else to do. People listen to a podcast because they chose to.
That's fair. Why did you start the podcast?
Everything else I did failed. Everything else I did failed. I kind of had no options left, man. I was like, well, I'm working at somebody else's business doing marketing, and I want to create something. I've been a podcast listener since, 2004, 2005, when they were really hard to find, and you actually had to have a high level of commitment to listen to them. So I was like, all right, I really love this thing. I guess let me just go for it as a side thing and see what happens. And because I guess put a lot of attention on doing it as a professional, it took off very quickly. We did 10,000 downloads in our first 30 days, and the numbers kind of grew up from there.
What was your first episode?
So I'm from the school of believing that you should have like an episode 0 where it basically talks about the show, why you're doing the show, and what people can expect, and you kind of treat that as like your table of contents so people can come back to it. So that's my first episode. It's like 8 minutes talking about my life and why I'm doing this and what people are going to learn from the show. But my first interview was with a guy named John Hurd. That's one of the largest. He brokers cattle ranches, which I thought was the most interesting thing ever. And he's brokered some of the largest ranches in the world. And it was really cool because he's one of the most successful guys I personally know. And I got to sit down and like talk to him about how this works. And we got a lot of great feedback from people because number one, people love to learn about real estate. Number two, it's so weird and interesting. People are like, he brokers cattle ranches? Why? And I think for me, that was really cool in that way.
So you have written a lot in your life, and you were setting yourself up for that, and then teaching, and then you decided to get into the voice world. Did you feel comfortable behind a microphone?
Yeah, I'll say I will because, like I said, I was an academic writer, man. So, like, my writing was I wrote a book coming out of grad school that didn't do very well. And once you hear the title, you can kind of guess why. It was called Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus and the Apotheosis of Augustus. Can you guess why nobody bought it? So it was very difficult for me to take my writing and simplify it. So that took me, it was like a 2-year process of learning how to do that. Now I've written like hundreds of articles from different publications and stuff like that. But for me, audio was very easy because I like talking. I like interviewing people. And my podcast is audio only because I don't like video editing. It's a pain in the butt. And I don't like looking at myself on video. So that's for me why I've done it that way. It was very easy and I could create lots of, quote unquote blog content without having to figure out the whole writing aspect right away.
Well, thanks for doing video here. I think you look wonderful.
Aw, shucks, man. I even remembered the lights. I got them up.
There you go. How did you, when you got the Inc. magazine feature, were you selling to them? Like, hey, do a feature on me, or did they come to you?
I had the writer actually come to me as a podcasting expert because of a lot of people I had interviewed. At that point in time, I had interviewed Kevin Harrington, Grant Cardone, Modest Yahoo, who's a platinum recording artist. So I had interviewed like a lot of cool people. So they had come to me as a podcasting expert to kind of get my feedback on, well, how can you be a great podcast guest?
So basically they were doing an article at that point saying, here's what we're looking for, and then that works out like that. Pretty cool. When you are putting your messaging out on your show, how do you position yourself every episode so that people can continue to learn from you, or think of you as a credibility with a lot of credibility, a lot of social proof? Do you do that every episode type of thing?
I do that publicly outside of the show, but I feel like on the show I don't really do that, and the reason is because I'm there to teach my audience, and my positioning and my credibility and all that stuff doesn't really matter to them. They're there to help me tell the guest story. So that's something I've spent a lot of time on becoming very good at. And like I said, I did 200 episodes, man, and I didn't feel good about interviewing until I did 200 episodes. So, now as I'm closing in on 400, I feel like I'm pretty good at it. And what I've managed to do is take the viewpoint of the person that's listening and tell that story through that vein. And I think that's why I've been pretty successful at it. I haven't worried about the positioning and like telling my audience how, like awesome I am or anything like that. Like I'll leave that up to them to decide. But in terms of like what I use the show for publicly, of course, I'm always going to take that positioning when I can.
What's something really, really big that you've done that you never thought was possible?
When I first started speaking on stages, that was kind of cool. When I got on TV the first time, that was cool because it was kind of like, wow, I just never expected that I would be doing any of this stuff. Which is the weirdest thing. Modern TV studios are nothing like I expected to be. There's like one person in an automated camera. It's crazy. So that was really cool. And also, speaking at conferences, because I just never expected that I'd be somebody on a stage speaking to groups of people. So that was an experience I never expected.
And I don't know what TV stations you went to, but they're probably really dirty and they're not as like amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like that you see is like this one little, what you see on camera is the only thing that's clean and ready. And so whenever I take people to the TV station that I host my show on, they're like, whoa, this is not what I expected.
Yeah, I went up to this I was on TV in New York a couple times, and like I went into the studio. There's the only person in the studio is the host. That's it. Like, so you're in there with the host, and there's like these automated computer controlled cameras, and there's guys in a booth somewhere who you'll never meet, and it's just really weird.
Yeah, definitely. What is Jeremy Ryan Slate the best in the world at?
I think communicating, man. I really enjoy people, and I really enjoy learning from people. So I think that I've always followed my inquisitiveness. I don't know if that's a word. or what I've always wanted to learn from people. And because of that, I feel like I've done very well with it. I really enjoy people. I really enjoy learning. So to me, I feel like that's an underlying skill for a lot of things. And that's kind of allowed me to do a lot of different things. I've become better at sales. I've become better at, networking. I've become better at branding and positioning, all because I can communicate. And when you can do that, it really helps.
What's something that your clients from Command Your Brand come to you often asking about? Like, what's the FAQ of their business or their brand?
A lot of times people don't know their own story, and they have a life experience, they have a lot of this stuff, but they don't know how to put it all together. So before we book people on a podcast, the biggest thing we do is we actually take them through a whole storytelling method, putting together their story, message, and call to action. Because you see people that'll get on a show and they're kind of like blah 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 blah. They have no idea or direction on where they want to go, and you have to what we're doing here is very free flowing, but still you have to have in your mind how you want to communicate that so it lines with what you want to do. And I think that's the big thing we train guests on, is having your story down and your talking points on your story, but also being able to tell it through different lenses, because one audience is going to need to hear it in a very different way than another. And I think that's the biggest thing, is they come to us because they want to get their story in line, they want to get their message out there. And believe it or not, a lot of people end up sucking at a call to action. Like, where do you want people to go and how are you going to use that to build a relationship? Because it's not just about leads, it's about building an audience and building a relationship.
What's interesting is while this show is not scripted and free-flowing, I do a ton of research beforehand to make sure that I know little things about whoever I'm talking to beforehand.
Sure.
And so I knew, with your middle name, that was the issue. And so I actually learned about this. Well, I figured it was the issue, or I figured that was what you did. So Brandon T. Adams, I don't know if you know him. But,
he's the man.
Yep. So he uses T. And his answer is for the same reason, because there's another Brandon Adams that basically ranks above him. So he's like, if I put that T in there, number one, it makes people think. And number two is it will rank higher if people are searching that than the other name. And so, I think you do have to do some research, listen. I've listened to a couple of your shows that you do, that other people have had you on, and you learn little weird things, like you lived in a town that had 20 people or something ridiculous, or one stop sign, or
5/8 of a mile, baby.
5/8. I mean, that's
here's a funny fact about Brandon Adams, by the way. The first time I emailed Brandon, I screwed up his email, and he, believe it or not, has a similar email address to Bryan Adams, the singer. And I actually got a response, "No, I'm not doing interviews." And I'm like, wait, Bryan Adams. Crap, sorry.
Oh, man, that's interesting. What's a big mistake similar to that you messed up on and then still figured out how to turn it around and win from it?
I think that's tough, because I feel like I've done that in interviews before in the moment, but I figure out a way to kind of turn it back around. So I can't really think of one off the top of my head. I'm just usually very good at being quick on my feet, because I know usually I've asked people questions before and been like, "Oh, you think blah blah blah," and they're like, "No, I don't." I'm like, "Well, I was just inferring from what you just said, but let's take a look at that." And I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I know I've done it before.
That's good. What's a day in the life of Jeremy Ryan Slate?
I'm not a super early riser, man. I'm up at 7 in the morning, head to the gym, which is down the street from me. And I work from home, have an employee that comes and works here a couple days a week. So, it's not super tough, man. I get moving, working by about 8:30, 9 o'clock. I'm usually on a lot of interviews. I'm doing a lot of webinars, creating a lot of content. And right now I'm doing a lot of the selling in our business because I'm trying to hire a new salesperson. So I'm kind of holding a few hats as I'm putting, more people into the company at the same time.
What do you outsource and what do you actually do yourself?
We don't outsource anything because I'm not a huge believer. I know I have to get better at this. I've been talking to a couple companies about outsourcing a lot of my podcast work, like the editing and stuff like that.
So you still edit your podcast?
I have interns that usually do it for me.
Got it. Okay.
And then, they write a paper for college and they get credit or whatever. Which is kind of cool because you can help them out with a lot of stuff. But I'm really looking at keeping that as more of a dedicated position where I don't have to teach somebody every 10 weeks. So that's something I really need to take a look at. But in terms of, we have client manager on staff, we have PR on staff, we had sales on staff. I'm just trying to replace that. So I really like to keep as much in-house as I can because that is really how you build a bigger business, is by having those people, though it stink at first to figure out where that money's coming from. You got to figure it out and you got to have the right people on there because you can create something bigger that way.
What do you suck at in that same regard? So what are the things that the people on your team will do because you're not good at it?
Well, here's the biggest problem, man, is sometimes I think I'm the best at everything and I'm not. And you have to kind of have good self-awareness was something that took me a while to develop. So it was kind of figuring out what I wasn't good at and figuring out also. So here's the thing too, is I am good at a lot of things, but when you're trying to do it all, you can't do it well. So it was realizing like what I could afford to give away so that we could grow. So I was great at managing clients, booking their shows, doing all that kind of stuff, but we can never grow with me trying to sell and do that. So I brought on a client manager who does a way better job than I did. And I think that's really interesting as well. Sales, I'm not able to be on it full time because I'm trying to create content and do all this other stuff. So it's like that's why I need to get that next thing off. Because I think as a business owner, you should be good about and know how a lot of things in your business function, but it doesn't mean you should be doing them all. And I think that's the thing is for me, I thought I was the best at everything early on. And when you don't have that level of self-awareness, you kind of suck and create a lot of issues in your own company. Once you realize that, hey, you need other people and other people can do things better than you, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah. And that's powerful because you can only do so many things. And if you're tied to everything in the business, some of those things will lack and some of them will do okay. What made you cry last?
Wow, cry last.
Happy or sad? Cry.
I want to say my wedding, which was like almost 3 years ago now, just because my wife is my best friend. Like we get along so well, and I think just to kind of realize like, hey, I could spend the rest of my life with this person. That was probably the last time I cried.
And she's a business partner with you, correct?
Yeah, she does all of our PR and publicity.
And so you see her 24/7 basically?
Yeah, she also does PR for a couple other companies too, in addition to being a partner here. So, she's outside of the office, some period of time, and then she's here some period of time. So we get along very, very well because we have really great communication. We can both say whatever we got to say to each other and be able to handle whatever comes out of each other's mouth. And I think because of that, that's why we're able to do so well together.
What's something most people communicate incorrectly that you can then understand, analyze, and help them change?
In terms of what?
Well, with a couple, with a business, because I think communication is so important. And most people, when there's an issue, it's because they're not telling someone. So I realize I need to get rid of this employee. I need to tell my wife this. I need to, how do they...
It can be simple though, because like here's the thing is like you could do something small like forget to take out the garbage and you don't tell your wife or do something like that. And it's as human beings we're inherently good. We want to be very good, so we start to withhold ourselves from that other person for fear of we're going to injure them in some way, shape, or form. So if we take a look at things, we can actually see that there's things we've done to create a lot of the problems in our relationship because we're inherently good. And, we're not like bad for the most part. There's only 20% of the world that are bad people. 80% of the world are actually inherently good people. And because of that, we don't want to hurt others. So if we just took a look at like what we're forgetting to tell people or what we're intentionally not telling people and just communicate on that, sometimes it's some stuff we got to clean up, man. But if you are communicating with the other person, you can actually fix it. Whereas when you start to withhold yourself, it doesn't work so well.
What's your favorite question to ask on your show?
My last one, which is if you could sum up your life with a quote in your tombstone, what would that look like? And a lot of people are like, whoa, dude, that's awesome. Where you mentioned Noah Kagan before, had the best response to that. He goes, no quotes, man, just a jukebox, tequila, and tacos.
Am I asking you hard questions or questions that are really making you think? Because I've seen you on different shows before and you typically answer very quickly.
You're asking the questions people don't ask. A lot of times people ask very similar questions. So, I think that's a journalist in you, man.
Love it. I position myself as the best interviewer in the world. I probably know.
Because you probably see I pull my head back and think about it for a second.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm probably not the greatest interviewer in the world, but I might be 1%, right? Yeah. And so if you start positioning yourself as this thing, people are going to look at that and be like, maybe he is. What's the elevator pitch of you? Not the business you. So when you meet someone at a networking event or you get on stage at a conference and you have 30 seconds to pitch yourself, what do you say?
I created life on my own terms. So I want to help other people do the same thing. So I interview some of the world's top experts to help other people learn from them.
And then when you are presenting and promoting the podcast, how do you then take that and then promote the brand into it, the business, where you make more money?
And that's the thing people I don't think realize is like a podcast, like you can make a little bit of advertising money or something like that, but that's not where you're going to make it all. It's off of having a back end business. So I kind of use that as creating this big communication line and this big image and this big, branding. Whereas then once I'm known, it's easier to make known what I'm doing. So that's really how I use it, is that the bigger I can build the show, the better my business does. And I think that's what's really interesting because more people know you, like you, and trust you.
What do you do then from the show to then get them to that back end piece where you make money?
I haven't directly pitched guests unless they ask me. It's not usually something I'm working on because I'm more treating them like my experts. But believe it or not, guests will give me a lot of referrals. I get a lot of great referrals from guests. I get a lot of great opportunities from being on a lot of podcasts, so that's been huge as well. And we get most of our business from referrals. It's only now we've started building. We just built out a course and built out a lead funnel and all this other stuff. Like that wasn't something that was ever really a concern because we've always gotten great referrals from people.
How does someone get on your show?
It's tough at this point, man, because I'm booked so far out. I'm booked like 60 to 90 days out because I get so many interviews in. So I actually have an application process that I have a Google Sheet set up, and I give them all the important questions for me. And then based on that, I can decide like, how does this fit with the positioning of my audience? And if it's good to go, we send them out a calendar link and, get them booked.
Do you do it by seasons? Meaning not like this is season 1, season 2, season 3, but more of like from a theming perspective of like, we're going to only talk about this, like cryptocurrency, or is it the only thing we're going to talk about or anything like that?
No, I did have a little bit of a shift recently. First of all, I'm big on consistency. I always want to have episodes coming out. But I had a shift recently where I was always like in the business space and I'm kind of like, but I don't really talk about a lot of business concepts. I talk more about life and stuff like that. So I've actually moved the podcast over to health self-help because I'm always talking about like different struggles people are going through in their life, different things they're doing. And yeah, that helps them to build a business, but we don't directly talk about like, well, what's your ad strategy? What's your funnel look like? What's your opt-in? Like we don't talk about a lot of that stuff. So like for me, I feel like I've had a theme shift and not really a theme shift, but more like I've come to grips with what I actually have here. And that was something that happened for me recently, believe it or not.
That's interesting. As you said that, I never thought of that before. I obviously have business under my category as well, but we don't really talk a lot about business, right? Maybe in this, we've talked 15% about certain things, and it's more of just the medium that is your business and how to position it. And so, self-help, that's interesting. I might look into that. If someone is thinking about getting on a podcast or starting a podcast, what would your advice be to them? Why should they do it?
Well, I would say, first of all, figure out like why you're doing it. Because a lot of people are just like, I'm going to make passive income. Yeah, great, buddy. Good luck. That's not the point to doing something like this because it's a very crowded space and you're going to have some massive numbers to be able to do that. But then the thing I would take a look at is what's your differentiating characteristic? Like what can you do differently than a lot of people out there? And because if you're not differentiating, you're actually promoting your space. So if you're not looking at how am I different than all these other podcasts out there and how can I give somebody something different, then that's really, what you're going to do. You're being promoting all the other podcasts out there. Like John Lee Dumas does a great job with his show, but there are thousands of people out there trying to do the exact same show as John. And that's why nobody else is succeeding at doing what he's doing because he is the space for what he's doing. So figure out how you're different and create something different.
After talking with me for 45 minutes or an hour now, what do you think that is for me? What's that differentiator that I'm providing to you?
You want to ask the hard questions nobody else is asking because you really want to get deep into what people are actually thinking.
Well, there you go. I appreciate that. What's something else that I haven't asked you that most people do?
People usually ask me like what I'm reading and stuff like that, but I feel like that's so basic. Like a lot of people ask that kind of stuff,
We know what you're reading because you just told us. Shoe Dog.
That's true. You got me, man. I volunteered it.
No, that's fine. I think that's word of mouth marketing, right? That book is really good. And there's only a handful of books that people really will go to bat for. And that's definitely one of them.